Hello and welcome to Law Matters, where we explore various legal topics that impact the lives of many of us, our friends, and our families on a daily basis. I'm your host, attorney Michael Conroy. I'm a partner in the law firm of Hassett and George, a general practice law firm with offices in Simsbury and Cromwell. I have been in practice for 20 years, and my practice is concentrated primarily in the area of civil litigation, handling such matters as personal injury, professional negligence, divorce, and commercial disputes. On this program, we will bring you information that is eye-opening and informative regarding areas of the law that touch many of our lives, but about which there are common misconceptions. On this edition of Law Matters, we are discussing law enforcement and the use of force, a hot topic that has been all over news and social media recently. We have two gentlemen here in the studio to talk about it. Attorney Elliot Spector is a law enforcement expert and runs the Spector Criminal Justice Training Network, which is a nonprofit organization designed to provide quality training to police officers. He is also of counsel for the law firm of Hassett and George in Simsbury. Lieutenant Kevin Dillon is a 25-year veteran law enforcement officer, retired from the Wethersfield Police Department. He has served as detective commander, a SWAT team member since 1993. He served 6 years as a team leader and his last 3 years as commander of the regional 35-member SWAT team. Lieutenant Dillon also educates officers about the instinctual, physiological, and physical responses of the human nervous system during combat. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here today.
My pleasure.
Why do you both believe that this topic is so important to people out there watching this program?
I think the present negative publicity that's been generated creates a false image of law enforcement officers. It communicates to the public that police officers generally use excessive force. Police officers are in great part racist, which is truly an image which isn't warranted. It's important to the community because the most important thing for law enforcement is community support. If you don't have the eyes and ears of the community, if they don't support you, you can't effectively enforce the laws. Another negative impact is the morale of police officers is negatively affected. If police officers don't feel comfortable in going out there and doing their jobs, they are not as aggressive in deterring crimes, then it's going to hurt society because obviously there will be more criminal activity. In addition to that, with all the negative publicity, we're concerned that quality people may not want to enter the area of law enforcement. And I think those are the three primary reasons why it's significant.
Law enforcement are assaulted on a regular basis, and by criminals no matter what.
Right.
This is only inspiring more radicals, more violence, more aggression towards law enforcement, really, which is completely unjustified. And naturally, we have incidents that we'll be talking about, but they are so minute. They're fractions of how many calls for services officers actually go to that actually use of force. And the media is portraying that police use force all the time. The data will show it's completely opposite. And everything Elliot said is 100% true. I mean, people are being primed to believe by the constant media. Priming is very important. I mean, it's that subconscious learning that they believe what they hear. And they believe this all the time. It greatly hinders. Look at the amount of violence that has been occurring based on incidents that have not even been to be excessive. So they've been turned around to make it look like completely false, creating violence and thousands and millions of dollars of damage. But I've never seen anything in my career that something has been turned around so much that has been so inaccurate.
Right. Now, I think when the average person hears the term use of force, most people will think of firearms or other type of weaponry. But as I understand it, the use of force by law enforcement personnel is actually a sort of a continuum, isn't that correct? Is that something that you can elaborate on?
I wouldn't say it's a continuum as for the legal term.
It's a ladder, right?
There are some police departments that use of force continuums. Those are becoming in disfavor because then police officers have to justify why they jump over initial steps.
Right.
So really, continuum concept has been rejected recently.
Yeah. There's because say there's three of us,
right,
and we have Elliot, Mike, and myself. Elliot might do a physical force technique for somebody. You might do one. I might do one. All three might be completely different, but all three would be reasonable. But use of force, Elliot would think, but 99% is not lethal. All right, of a use of force. You think that's a fairly accurate number?
Sure. I mean, use of force includes everything from handcuffing to holding someone. For instance, if you want to take someone out of the bar, soft hand technique, taking them by the arm and leading them out of the bar, up to deadly use of force.
Right.
Okay. And explain for us, if you would, what sort of training officers go through in order to be able to assess a situation and correctly choose what type of force is appropriate?
To me, that's the big elephant in the room.
Right.
That's the issue. Officers are not being trained properly. I mean, they're just not. They're being trained properly, but not to try to present the skill that they're required to ask. I'll give you an example. I'm a wannabe golfer, and I got about 100 hours of golfing in my background. And maybe I go out once a year to try to golf, and I can't hit a white little ball down a fairway. And that's about the average training a police officer gets when it comes to physical control tactics. So if I get 80 hours to 100 hours in basic training, and now I do it once a year for 4 hours, there's just no way the officers will be able to have enough skill to try to handle these individuals. The New York case is a perfect example. These guys were not malicious, they were just unskilled in multiple officer, one suspect takedown. But that's the whole issue. They are not trained proficiently pertaining to the requirements that put upon them. Do you agree with me that
I don't agree that training is bad. I think training
Yeah.
is good. And given the economics, what it costs to train police officers, I think that municipalities do the best they can at this point in training. There's always room, and I do agree with this, for better training.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're speaking to.
Yes, yeah. But there's also so many different mandates out there that is very difficult to fulfill the dynamic training that is required. And I think that's another issue. And we have to change the way we operate. But then again, now all the funding's been taken away, so the municipalities don't have the funding to train their officers properly, and now it's being taken away even more. So I mean, you have a government entity who's trying to oversee this, but yet they're taking away all the funding that is required to create this high levels of skill. Just to communication alone, if you want to be proficient in communication, you're going to need more than maybe once a year for an hour or two to be effectively able to communicate somebody down in a de-escalation type of engagement.
At the same time, I don't think the real problem in law enforcement now is failure to train. I don't think the media issues we're dealing with have much to do with failure to train.
Yeah.
I think what people are seeing are news stories which are very, very infrequent, which has led to legislative action.
Yeah.
I mean, we have our legislature in the state now calling for, in addition to more training, keeping statistics on law enforcement. Part of the new statute requires reporting on police shootings. And this is a reaction to the Scott case that happened down in South Carolina where that individual was running away. Now, the reality of the situation is police officers in Connecticut, probably have approximately 2 million encounters with citizens every single year.
Right.
Things as simple as motor vehicle stops, which resulted in the 2 deaths of the Mississippi officers a couple days ago. So any incident with an encounter has a potential use of force component in it. If you go back 50 years, there'll be 100 million encounters. We have never in Connecticut had a single case as egregious as the Scott case. So they're creating an image that there's a problem when there really factually is none in that regard.
Right. And if I understand it correctly, the average officer is going to encounter a situation that requires use of potentially lethal force only on very, very rare occasions. Is that right?
Oh, no, that's not really true. I think it depends on where you're working. I think some of the rural municipal officers probably use force, on occasion. I can't even estimate that.
Right.
But being a prior Hartford police officer, we used force every single day.
Really?
I mean, we made multiple arrests
Yep.
on a daily basis. We were in struggles on a weekly basis. We had occasions to draw our firearms, certainly on a weekly basis, if not more than that. So it depends on where you're working. So it's not rare for police officers to use force. It's fairly common.
Right. And these situations are situations that can arise in a matter of mere seconds. Is that
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Police officers have to react. Obviously, the police officers in Mississippi, the New York officer that was killed last week, they didn't even have the seconds to react before they were murdered.
Now, Elliot, can you explain for us what the difference between legal use of force is and legitimate use of force?
Yeah, legitimate use of force is a fairly new concept that's coming up now. When we used to train police officers, and I do the legal aspects, Kevin does the physical aspects of use of force. I teach police officers, here are the limits in the law as to how much force you can use. Now the story is changing. Now we're training police officers how to handle situations without using force so that the citizens would see the force as being legitimate. So the legal thing is, yes, you can legally use force, but is it going to be perceived by the citizenry as a use of force that was reasonably necessary?
Right.
Okay, so there are two different things. I mean, if you look at the Ferguson incident, that was a legal use of force every day of the week. And if actually the reality of the situation, if you look at most of the cases of notoriety, almost all of those were legal use of force cases, except for the Scott case.
Right.
I think that they all were. However, citizens are saying, well, we don't believe you should use that much force. And that's where legitimacy comes in.
Okay, I think I see the distinction. So it's taking into account, really, in the training and the decision-making processes of the officers, really what the public perception is, and trying to avoid potentially inflammatory situations, as we've seen in the media recently. Is that
That's
right?
absolutely correct.
okay? And how is it that you alter the training of officers to try to steer away or exercise more restraint, as it seems like you're talking about?
Well, we teach officers that they have time, okay, and they should take their time, and when possible, they should try to avoid the use of force. And in particular, I like to teach officers to try to create a consensual use of force case. For example, someone refuses to show the police officer a license, okay, that's interfering with a police officer. That's an offense. The police officer can arrest the person. The police officer can tell anyone at any time to get out of a car. The person refuses to get out of the car. Now, in the old days, the police officers would react legally and pull them immediately out of the car. Now what we train police officers to do is try to create a consensual use of force. In other words, use your patience, repeatedly explain to him why he has to get out of the car, tell them that we don't want to arrest you, that we don't want to use force against you. If you get out of the car, we will not have to do that, and essentially make it the citizen's choice when there's a time and opportunity to do so.
What are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
Oh, it's 100% accurate. In getting back to the training, the officers have to, I think the training was different in understanding that they need to take control. It's much more of a strategic approach. They really have to think of the high ground now about how to protect themselves, how to communicate better with the individuals, because people pulling over, they're already going to believe something just by being pulled over. Regardless if they're doing 90 miles an hour, they're going to think they're profiled, they're going to think something else completely other than the fact that they might have been doing 90 miles an hour. So I think it just adds to it, especially with all the media. I think it'll look nothing but more professional when you have it, and some of the media won't show it, but some of the other media will. When you show the officer, listen, please come out of the car. We can talk about this. We don't really need to do this, but I need to see your license. I think once the media sees that, or once the public sees that, they're much more receptive. So I think it's a reasonable, excellent idea.
Okay. Now, a lot of the cases that we've seen stories about in the media seem to involve videos. I mean, everyone has cell phones with video camera capabilities. In some of these cases, there is video of the actual event. And some people have called for more video dash cams, in some cases suggesting that officers should be equipped with body cameras so that everything they do is on tape. What are your feelings on that?
I think cameras have done nothing but really improve the services, and really clear so many more officers than it's ever hurt. Right. Because officers 99% of the times are doing the right thing at the right time. I don't think it's a problem. There's going to be issues about it. A camcorder, for example, has no bearing on what I'm seeing. If my camera's here facing Elliot and I'm looking over here and there's a threat, what good is the camera going to do to me? And it doesn't have any perspective of what I see.
Right.
It doesn't. So I think there's a lot of pros, but there's some cons to it. But I think they're far more legitimately more pros, but it does not see what the officer perceives. There's time delays. There's frames per second. There's perception. There's so many different variables that the camera will show something, and you can always have somebody say, why didn't you see that? Well, because my attention was somewhere else. I mean, I could be looking right at Elliot, and they say, you're looking right at him, but I might be looking right behind Elliot, focused on something that's moving real quick. So it's got to be very deceptive. It's not three-dimensional. It's only the perception of the camera, but I still think it's beneficial. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree completely with Kevin. They're not perfect. However, They are beneficial to law enforcement, and most officers want to have body cams. There are several police departments that, even as far back as several years ago in Connecticut, purchased body cams. Those officers are only complaining because they want updated body cameras, because the body cams protect them. Citizens come in and make a complaint, you show them the video, they withdraw the complaint because they realize that they were wrong.
Right.
We have a case coming up, a trial that's coming up in September, where there's an individual who's claiming he had his hands up in surrender. In reality, we know he was reaching for what appeared to be a gun. And if we had a body cam, we wouldn't even have to try that case. They're going to help police officers tremendously.
Now, one point I've heard on the con portion of that argument is that it takes away officer discretion. If an officer, for example, wants to give a citizen a break and let them off with a warning, if it's on camera, the feeling is that they'll have to issue a ticket, for example, in every case. If someone is speeding and the officer is inclined to let that person go, he wouldn't have the discretion to do so anymore. Is that a concern?
No, they will always have the discretion under the law. I think what you might be hearing is they might be more reluctant to exercise that discretion in certain circumstances. I hope that's not true. I hope that the body cam becomes part of the police officer's body so that he doesn't even know that it's there when he's actually, using the body cam.
It'll change too. At first, I'm sure you're going to see discretionary actions restricted because they don't know what they're going to do. They don't know how much oversight is going to be about it. They don't know how much their discretion might be analyzed. But it's when the first camcorders came out. Everybody was almost acting for the camera. But as Elliot just said, after a while, it becomes non-existent to them.
Right.
For example, for us having an interview for the first time, somebody not used to a camera, they'll probably choke because now their thoughts are on the camera. And we've had a lot of incidents. But officers, once they become regulated with it, like Elliot said, it becomes a second part of their equipment. And then the normal procedures and policing will continue.
Okay. Now, are body cameras working their way into the training that you do with police officers?
Oh yeah. Especially we need training on it because there's many variables that are going to come under analysis. However, the reality of a body cam, it's almost like if you ever watch body cams, they're not solidified. They're this.
Right.
All right, so they're more audio sometimes than they can be beneficial than visual, because when somebody's moving like this, the camera is so fast. When they're stationary in this kind of position, you'll get a little bit more. So there's definitely training, like any piece of new equipment.
And what are some of the new trends in training police officers in dealing with different levels of force?
Well, I think communications is one of them. We have our communication programs have skyrocketed, as they should, as they really should, because I don't even know if in our basic level, which has a great deal of curriculum, we need to really start to focus on the communication aspect for law enforcement. I was in an Apple store not too long ago, and I met a gentleman, and he was telling me, he goes, I've had like 3 weeks of training just to meet and greet people here. Law enforcement might have a couple hours of that. So we really have to modify. That's one trend I've seen. With the importance of it, because what Elliot talked about legitimate, just learning how to, no, listen, I don't want to fight you. I really want to negotiate this, figure it out. I just have to be here. Get out of my house. I can't right now. It's a 911 hang-up. But tell me how I can resolve this, and I'll get out as quick as possible. Whereas those are skills. They're not necessarily innate for people. So that's one big trend I've seen. Obviously, use of force, understanding the fact that the force that they've been using is not unreasonable. We're, again, talking about fractions of out of 100 percentile. And it's that minute. But it's because it's such an issue, it's been, I seen a change. But Elliot, talk more about the legislation.
Well, with regard to the training issue, I think one of the more important things is police report writing. The police officers have to be more detailed in writing the reports from start to finish. The focus that we have presently in the media is on the police officer's actions. But if you look deeper into all of these cases, police use of force cases follow a profile. The police officer does not want to have an encounter with a citizen if it can be avoided. The police officer is called because the citizen is committing some illegal act. Second, the police officer instructs the person to do or not to do something. Third, the person refuses to comply, sometimes runs away, sometimes fights or attacks the police officer. And then the police officer at that point after all that has occurred, is required to use force. And so teaching police officers to write their police reports to paint a full picture of what is occurring is important. And if we're talking about training, maybe we should talk about teaching too. Because I've heard an expression used, our young black males have to be afraid of police officers. What can we teach our young men? That's a common phrase that I've heard from politicians. And I think the story is very, very simple, and it follows the profile. If you don't want to have any contact with police, unfavorable contact, then what you should do is not commit a crime. If you don't violate the law, you probably won't have any negative interactions with police.
Sounds like that's pretty solid advice for just about anybody.
If you do want to commit a violation of the law, and you are confronted with a police officer, comply with the police officer's orders.
Right.
And if you do that, nothing will come to you, no harm will come to you, rather. I mean, the Ferguson case is a great example of that. He was kind of made a hero in many people's eyes, and yet, what did he do? He went into a store, he committed a larceny. The store owner approaches him, he could say, yeah, I was wrong, here's the cigars back, but no. He intimidates, he pushes the store manager, he leaves the place, and when he used force, he turned a larceny into a robbery, a larceny by force, which is a felony. And when the police officer confronts him on the street, listen to the police officer's orders. Stop or get out of the car. And he chose to attack the police officer, try to take the police officer's gun away from him. Mm-hmm. And then when he escapes, the police officer orders him again. And he starts to attack the police officer another time. Unfortunately, these people act in this way, and they are actually causing their own deaths or other types of physical harm. And that's what we should be focused on. Why are these things occurring? When we see these things about Black Lives Matter, and everybody says, and everybody I think agrees that all lives matter, right. The reality of the situation is that very few black males, proportionately, are killed by police officers. There's a Professor Richard Johnson who did a statistical study, 4 years FBI statistics from 2009 to 2012, and over 17,000 black males were murdered. At the same time, there were approximately 481 black males that happened to be killed by police officers. There were more black males killed by black citizens using justifiable homicide to protect themselves than police officers who were also using justifiable homicide. The risk out there is not police officers. The risk out there is, unfortunately, approximately 90% of black males of these 17,000 plus that are being killed by black males. We have to teach our young people to respect other people's lives, not to commit these types of crimes.
Right.
And I think that's the best thing we can do. Ironically, the attack on police officers, where police officers are more reluctant to use force to get involved in situations now, what that may come to is the 17,000 plus figure will go up, because if they aren't deterring and stopping the people who commit these crimes, then innocent citizens are going to be subjected to more harm. And that's tragic.
Right. Now, obviously, we've seen in the media various examples of cases that have been given a lot of attention and have touched a nerve across the nation. What do you two feel are some of the misconceptions about police and police use of force that have bubbled to the surface throughout these controversies that you would like to dispel, if you could?
I think the misconception about police officers using force in situations where they shouldn't too often, rather than focusing on the restraint that police officers use. We talk about the statistics and reporting of police officer use of force, and the Attorney General has called for that, and I agree wholeheartedly that that should be done. The Director of the FBI also called for that. But we're talking about police use of force statistics. There should be two other columns to paint a true picture of the real restraint that police officers use. One column should be, how many times could police officers use force legally where they choose not to? Another column, how many times could police officers use a greater use of force and they use a lesser use of force, very often at the risk of harm to themselves? And that would paint a true picture of the real state of police use of force. And so I think that is probably the most important misconception.
Yeah, and I think the data that you brought up has to be brought up in the media. Again, the media is the one for creating this whole issue. Well, a lot more than that, but as we could talk in another time. But instead of saying, no, ladies and gentlemen, the facts are this, that what Elliot just said, almost like 17,000 individuals were killed here. Not the belief that police officers are doing, and when the number is so low, they make it appear like it's all over the place. And with social media, with the, how many encounters do you think law enforcement have on a daily basis in the United States?
Well, I use the figure of 2 million a year just in Connecticut, which is a very small state with very few law enforcement officers. Connecticut has approximately 10,000 law enforcement officers. New York City has 36,000, to give you a picture. Right. Okay, so every day there are tens of thousands of police officers using force out there in a reasonable fashion, and yet we come up with a story every once in a while. People are still going back to Trayvon Martin to use as an example of police use of excessive force, and he wasn't even a police officer. Right. So they have to search for the bad stories to create the media attention.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is a topic that we could spend hours and hours on, gentlemen, and we've just scratched the surface here, but I thank you very much. That's all the time we have for this edition of Law Matters. Thank you, Attorney Elliot Spector and Lieutenant Dillon, for this informative conversation. We hope that you, our viewers, found the program helpful and informative. For additional information on this topic or other legal issues, please go to Hassett and George's website at www.hgesq.com. Please tune in next time when our topic will be what you need to know about home improvement contracts. Again, my name is Mike Conroy, and from all of us here at Law Matters, thanks for watching.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.